This is your urgent call to action. We are all called to lead in a world in chaos, crisis, and turmoil. Join a pivotal global movement for change to transform the leadership crisis worldwide. Will you play it safe, or will you wake up, step up, and speak out? Like Nelson Mandela did for South Africa and the world, we need a radical new way to think, act, and lead, leading boldly into the future. Join host Anne Pratt, a Harvard Fellow and multi-awarded businesswoman, and unlock the best version of yourself to revolutionize leadership with what the world needs now.
Greetings to all you future bold leaders. Thank you for joining us from around the world. My name is Anne Pratt, formerly from South Africa, and I relocated abroad to attend a Harvard Leadership Fellowship in beautiful Boston in the United States of America. Our bold leader today joins us from Lusaka, the capital city of Zambia, a landlocked country in Southern Africa. She's a well-respected financial journalist and keynote speaker. Empowered by her humble beginnings, she became parentless in high school in grade 11. After several successful years in private sector banking, she became the head of corporate affairs for the Independent Electoral Commission of Zambia just 7 months prior to the very hotly contested 2021 general elections. Undeterred by immense political pressure, temporary setbacks of increased violence and COVID cases during the election, she and her team delivered magnificent results. She is the proud recipient of the 2017-2018 prestigious Chevening Scholarship, funded by the British government for international changemakers. A nominee of the US State Department, she attended the International Visitors Leadership Program on Election Management and received multiple awards in Zambia for her contribution to the successful outcome of the 2021 general elections, which resulted in the peaceful transfer of power against the odds. We warmly welcome Patricia Luhanga and welcome to Leading Boldly into the Future. So Patricia, thank you so much for joining us from Lusaka today. Thank you for coming on and having this conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure for me to sit with you and just have a conversation around all issues in leadership and leading boldly into the future.
Thank you. And you know, that's a great place to start. You've had a number of profound, significant, and important leadership positions. You've also been recognized in different fora, not only in your own country in Zambia, but of course, in the United Kingdom, and of course, an invitation from the United States. So you've got this interesting global perspective. From what you've gleaned and learned, Patricia, what is your definition of leadership and what is your definition of bold leadership?
I think for me, leadership is about learning. And once you learn, you serve. So if you ask me about bold leadership is about resilience and the resilience that always remains unmatched. Now, there's actually a backstory to why I have said for me it's about learning and serving, and thereafter speak about resilience. I grew up in what I would say not really conducive environment. And when I say that, you can imagine you're coming into a family where parents are divorced and you grow up with a mother who was a civil servant. And speaking about civil service in this country in relation to pay, there's really nothing to write home about. So there is 4 of us. I'm the second born in a family of 4, the first 2 girls and the last 2 boys. And all of a sudden, this is a home where your father disappears and you remain with your mother. If you had 2 incomes, it means you have 1 remaining. That also means a drop in the standards of living. So whatever the bits of luxury that you were enjoying absolutely come to a stop. And you begin a life of adjusting at that young age. And if you ask me, I was 6 years old when my parents divorced, and I had just started my first grade. and life became miserable. And you see, from the word go, we didn't even realize that was a divorce, but we didn't have the courage to ask mom the
Yeah.
question of
Yeah.
where is dad and what does this mean for us? In our minds, he's just gone somewhere and he will come back. And he never came back. And so we grew up in a rural area where my mother
Yeah.
was working as a nurse. And it meant that some of the luxuries that I've spoken about had to drop. For instance, we never had an electricity propelled stove, not even a gas one. So it actually meant we needed to get some firewood from the bush for us to be able to cook, or you use charcoal for you to be able to cook. And when you begin to look at that trajectory, I remember telling my mother to say, this life is too hard. I'm not happy with what is going on. And
Yeah.
she indicated to me to say, there will come a time in life when all this will be history. And when it is history, you look back and say, it looked like a dream, and here we are today. What's important is for you to pay particular attention to education, because we come from a family that believe in education. And for me, initially, I thought it's just about policing the noisemakers and writing noisemakers,
Yeah.
until I realized, I think earlier in life, that it was about service. And service came in form of you making sure that everything was in order. And making sure that everything was in order didn't mean policing people, but it also involved playing an advisory role to your colleagues. But going back to where, we grew up from, we did all the chores in the house. We
Yeah.
used to clean. We didn't have the luxury of having maids in our homes, so everything rested on us. And for me, that was the preparation that helped me to settle in my first job, as I call it, and, managed everything with all the excellence that I could.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a wonderful backstory. And of course, it's a very inspiring story, Patricia. And our backstory often shapes and defines who we are. And it talks to the character of the person and the woman you are today. Moving to today, what do you think are the big leadership challenges, not only for Zambia, but for the African continent and perhaps globally? You have a very strong global perspective. What are the big, perhaps the top three challenges that stand out for you?
You've rightly said, the globe is literally looking for the kind of leadership that is going to push all sectors forward. And I've also noticed that leadership has evolved. I mean, when we look at the political arena, and when we look at the pre-independence period, post-independence, and to where we are today, there's quite a lot of evolution that we have seen. But obviously, I'm going to tackle this from a corporate as well as political perspective, because that is where I have spent, my life working. So I
Yeah,
think in terms of corporate leadership, we want to see transformational leaders, because there's quite a lot that is happening globally. You've got technological advancements, you've got pandemics that are hitting when we least expect,
yeah,
and you literally have, the world that is moving at a faster pace than expected. And for you to keep moving forward, for you to be innovative, for you to be able to catch up, I think transformational leadership for me plays a critical role. And that is why I'm saying, I think from a corporate perspective, it's very important. And then speaking to the political side of things, I work for the Electoral Commission of Zambia. Our role is to administer the electoral process, conduct elections. And what we have seen and what people are demanding for is ethical leadership. Ethical leadership from our politicians, because
yeah,
there are a lot of governance issues around everything that is going on. For instance, corruption is one of the things that, you know, countries and Africa, Zambia in particular, are speaking to. And we know that corruption is a cancer that really eats into all sectors of the economy, all sectors of social life. If you look at everything that you need to have in order for you to move, this is a huge challenge. And for Zambia, you also get to see the fact that last year we issued in a new government, and top of the agenda is the issue of, let's see how we can maybe stamp out corruption, if at all it can be done completely. But it's very critical that we begin to go that direction. Another issue that applies obviously across the board, issues of governance. I think corporate governance is very, very critical. And for me, it's an overarching leadership perspective that I want to bring to the table, whether you're in corporate, whether you're in politics. If you understand your role very well, you'll be able to allow a certain, you know, perspective of leadership, a certain way of working. You will allow all the systems, the procedures, the policies, you know, to flow accordingly. So for me, I think those are the challenges that I want to bring into perspective, that this is what is happening in many countries, and Zambia inclusive.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's a wonderful segue, Patricia. I mean, I know that, and congratulations, you know, you won the 2022 award from the Institute of PR and Communications in Zambia. And I believe that award was for how you covered and delivered, you know, on the 2021 general election. I was curious, and you talk about governance. I mean, reading a little bit about the Zambian election, and I believe your election happened on the 12th of August. On the 14th of August, your incumbent president started making noises about, will they be free and fair? And was this a kind of rigged election? And then on the 16th of August, he went on to public television and congratulated his opponent, your then president-elect, now president. And I just wondered, to your point, having won this award, having played a major role, what for you are the critical governance issues, and what role do you think the media play?
It's actually a great question you ask, Anne, and just to give you the backstory, I am a specialized financial journalist. I did financial journalism at master's level, and I've worked in financial services, and that's banking. And so when I was approached to attend an interview for the role of corporate affairs manager for the Electoral Commission of Zambia, you know, at first I didn't even know what I was doing sitting in that interview room, because you begin to look at the two, finance on one side and governance on the other side. What is it that I even know? But then I realized in communication, you can't say you know nothing. In fact, communicators are better placed, they're better positions to understand any sector wherever they are pushed in. So fast forward to my appointment, I was appointed 7 months before Zambia's general election. And you have been reading about this. You'll know that the 2021 general election came at the backdrop of credibility questions concerning the Electoral Commission of Zambia. My role was to also provide solutions in terms of our stakeholder engagement strategies, and ensure that I also contributed to the acceptance of election results by stakeholders. So you have different departments, each one playing a role, but critical for us in corporate affairs was communication and stakeholder engagement. And we put in place very deliberate measures in terms of our engagements with stakeholders. And we also had some interesting support from our ICT department, from our electoral operations department. So in achieving this, for me, I say it's teamwork. So what is it that the Zambia Institute of Public Relations looked at for them to give me that award? First of all, they looked at the time that I was in the commission, 7 months before an election. And by the way, my appointment itself was a crisis because people doubted and said, she's coming from the banking sector into governance. What does she know? How is she even going to
Yeah.
handle this? You and I know that politics on the continent are very emotive. You know,
Yes.
people will call you all sorts of names. They'll
Yeah.
say whatever they want because there's an agenda that they're driving. So we
Sure.
went in, I think for me, not really being sure what I was going to find, but I said, let me go in. If I fail, I'll come out. But I don't want to have a situation where I regret not having gone there. If I fail, I'll learn something out of it and I'll be able to progress. So what we
And
did,
just on that, Patricia, I mean, I'm curious in that, in your description, having got there and analyzed what was there, what was your kind of light bulb moment around, aha, this is what we're dealing with, and this is what we need to do?
I walked into a meeting room where political parties had gathered, and they looked at me and said, now they're bringing children to deal with us. I
When
said,
was that? When was that?
It,
In May?
it was actually in Lusaka where we
Yeah,
had a meeting with the political parties, and my office handles the political parties. I am the link between the commission and the
yeah,
political parties. And I walk into the room and they don't even want to speak to me because they think this is a child. And I said, this is what I should expect. There's
yeah,
going to be a lot of disrespect. And
yeah,
others said, oh, she's actually a woman. And I said, there we go now with the story of women. And I remember in that moment, because all they want to see Anne, especially for a woman, there's this notion that we are emotional. And I told myself, they want to see emotions. They want me to burst and just scream and do whatever. And
yeah,
I told myself, you're not going to do that. You'll stay calm, regardless of what they'll say, regardless of the disrespect that will come to you, you will stay calm. One of the things that people ask, and is how did you manage to go through that moment, from the time we started preparing for the election to the time that we were done with the election? How did you manage to remain calm? And what they say is, if you want to define calmness in
yeah,
the face of adversity, in the face of trouble, in the face of chaos, Patricia is that description. She is that definition. And I think even for me, I didn't know how calm I can be until I was literally thrown into the fire. And when I
yeah,
speak about the fire, it's not as simple as maybe, the politics that we watch, in the probably Western countries. Africa and Zambia in particular, politics are hot. It's a place where you don't even want to go to, worse off if it's election time.
yeah,
Everybody wants to win. And depending on which side they're sitting, they look suspiciously at you. But your role as an electoral commission, as an electoral management body, is that of a referee. All you're doing is just enabling the process. The
yeah.
people of Zambia are the ones that are deciding, and they're just enabling the process by counting the number of votes cast and announcing on behalf. Now, that is where issues of governance come in. There is a ruling party in place.
Yeah.
You also know there are opposition political parties. And by the way, Anne, we had 16 presidential candidates in last year's general election.
Wow.
Everyone came with their own expectations. They had
Yeah,
their own views about the Electoral Commission of Zambia. And if
yeah,
anything, we were being looked at as a commission that was being used by the ruling party. Now comes the hour, we declare the election results, and the opposition then won. And people came back and said, what a credible election. What an incredible work that you have done. I remember meeting the Commonwealth Secretary General, Baroness Dr. Patricia Scotland, And she spoke to me and said, look, people said Zambia needed a miracle to deliver this election. You and your team are the miracle that this country needed. And
Yeah.
so we showed clearly that we are able to stick to governance issues, regardless of who was in power, because the decider was not ourselves, but the people of Zambia. And if you look at the history of Zambian elections rather, you'll see that we have changed leaders. 1991, we changed. Came 2011, we changed. And came 2021, we changed different political parties, different leaderships getting into office. But this comes with its own challenges. And the challenges are the things that I've spoken about, where there's a certain perception that
Yeah.
maybe because you are working and there's a ruling government, then that ruling government has a role to play, or they control you and they tell you, what to do.
I'm really curious to know, you walked in, they said you're a child, they said you're a woman, you had to deal, you remain calm. What were the steps that you went through? This was 7 months before the election. Can you
Mm.
just very briefly illustrate what steps you went through? What did you do to get to that point of credibility?
So first of all, at individual level, I knew the kind of environment I was getting into, and
Yeah,
it demanded that I prepare myself. I was recently reading where we've always talked about the 3P triple bottom. Now, from the profits, people, and planet, we have added preparedness. That is what I went with. I said, this is not an institution where we are looking at profits and all, but we have people, and we also want to see prepared leaders. In terms of preparation, I started working on my mental readiness, my mental health, and how that was done, and is accepting that these things are going to happen. People are going to insult me because I have seen what is going on, what my predecessors went through.
yeah,
These are things that are all over TV, they're in the papers. So you know that this is the kind of environment you're going into.
sure.
The question you ask yourself is, am I any of these things that these people are saying I am? The answer is no. If the answer is no, then why should I be bothered? And that is what for me was bringing the calmness to just say, do your job and walk away. That was at personal level. But when
Yeah,
it comes to the team, we had an amazing team. We had amazing leadership that was ready to deliver a credible election. What we did was we engaged our stakeholders, and we mapped our stakeholders. We looked at their needs. We looked at our shortcomings, and it
yeah,
was, too little a time for us to be able to do everything. But I can assure you that we did everything we could to carry our stakeholders along the way on all the electoral processes. Political parties were informed. The media was informed that if anything, media played a very critical role in
yeah,
ensuring that we had a credible electoral process. They were our allies every time we had scheduled briefings. We also had, briefings as and when we had issues coming up. We would invite them to the office. We would take them through processes, and they will be writing to give us credible information. On top of that, the issues of disinformation and misinformation were very more pronounced during that period. But the mainstream media played a critical role in helping us to debunk some of these things. So they became credible sources of information. If somebody
yeah,
reads about the Electoral Commission of Zambia, they would want to confirm from the credible institutions, established media houses, are they saying the same? Or what are they saying? And we also made sure that our social media platforms were up to speed, up to date with information that we were giving out in terms of voter education, electoral processes, and so on and so forth. From an IT point of view, we had given ourselves a target of declaring results within 72 hours. And I remember most of the stakeholders said, you're too ambitious. This is being over ambitious. It's never
yeah,
happened in the country.
yeah,
And if this is done, then we'll give you a lot of respect as a commission. So our IT team, together with the elections and logistics teams, worked out a model that was going to help us deliver and announce the general election results within 72 hours. So what we had was the end of the matter. We had the end picture. We had the end game in mind. If we have to deliver this election within 72 hours from the time the last polling station closes, what do we need to put in place in terms of logistics, in terms of
Yeah.
monitoring?
Yeah.
How is this going to be done? And we also gave ourselves, the service level in terms of the turnaround time. How long should it take for us to move the ballot papers from the polling station to the totaling center? And we also looked at the probably maximum number of voters per polling station. How many voters are in the polling station, and how long will it take us to count? And because remember, this is a physical count that you're doing. So how long will it take us to do the count? And we worked out all that, and we delivered the general election within 69 hours. We had a few extra hours to go. And that, I think, for us played a critical role. But above all, we allowed political parties to have agents in all the polling stations. We have about 12,000 polling stations across the country as the Electoral Commission of Zambia. And political parties were told to make sure they mobilized agents. What we were doing was enhancing transparency of results. So results were announced at polling stations, and these agents were allowed to have a copy of the results so that in case of any dispute, you have a comparison. What is it that was issued at the polling station, and what is it that is being declared or announced at the National Results Center? And that helped a lot. We also did allow international observers to come through. International observers give credibility,
Of course,
to the electoral process. And
yeah.
if you say you will not allow them to come, people then will become suspicious and say, what is it that these people are hiding? And so even the parallel voter tabulation system, we had a system that we were using as an independent electoral management body that is mandated by law to undertake elections. But you also have civil society organizations that are doing the parallel tallying of results. And the law does not allow them to declare or announce any results until the Electoral Commission of Zambia does that. So when we announced and declared the result, they agreed and said, actually, there's just a small margin of error, which was 0.01 percent, which you give and take, and that gave us credibility in terms of how we worked. But what really made the Electoral Commission of Zambia, and myself particularly, to be recognized by the Zambia Institute of Public Relations was the way we engaged the stakeholders in the run-up to the general election. It took away all the suspicions. Let me not say all, but most of the suspicions. It enhanced transparency, and it also contributed to the acceptance of election results because we communicated all the processes, and with the help of the media in Zambia, we did reach to the masses of the Zambian people.
That's incredible, Patricia, to you and your team. And I think what struck me reading a little about it was that your former president, Lunga, on 2 days after the election happened, was making these allegations of could it be free and fair. And yet 2 days later, on the 16th, he announced that, he congratulated his opponent. So I guess my question is, you've alluded, what happened on the 14th of August? Why were those allegations made? And secondly, with the role of the media, how did you persuade the media, or what was it that you did with the media to ensure that the media were committed to the integrity of the election process rather than being dramatic in trying to fuel these false allegations?
That's a great question, Anne. And let me also mention the fact that the election last year happened during COVID times.
Yeah.
So it wasn't business as usual, it was business unusual.
Yeah.
Instead of having the physical campaigns, the rallies that you usually have, everything, people going to each other to speak about these issues, the road shows, we didn't have that. It meant us moving, virtual, moving online, moving it to social media, including ourselves as Electoral Commission of Zambia, because our voter education equally takes, that particular format. So
Yeah.
we came up with standard operating procedures for us to be able to conduct an election during the times of COVID. You may be interested to know, Anne, that the poll day, the election day for Zambia is enshrined in the constitution, and there is nothing anyone can do to move it unless you have a state of emergency. But when you talk about the pandemic that we had, it wasn't a state
Yeah.
of emergency. So as
Yeah.
a commission, we consulted the Ministry of Health, other stakeholders to see how are we going to handle this election. And we came up with a technical committee on elections and COVID, which eventually developed standard operating procedures to help us run an election. As we run this election, we should also minimize the levels of infection and the number
Yeah.
of deaths out of COVID-19.
Sure.
Some of these standard operating procedures did not sit well with the political parties because they thought we were stifling their campaigns, but we had to engage them on several occasions to take them up, put them up to speed with where we were in terms of COVID-19. And when it came to those issues, the Ministry of Health became an authority. We were not, and we are still not, an authority in terms
Yeah.
of health-related issues. We'll call
Yeah.
the experts to come and speak to the political parties, give them the patterns of infection and tell them to say, these rallies are super spreaders, and look, if you subject the people that you want to come and vote for you
Yeah.
on election day to this pandemic, some may be sick on that particular day, others may have even died. It means you do not have the numbers that you require. Of course, for us, what was important was we had communicated. And if you look at the COVID-19 cases in Zambia, in the months of July and August, when we held the election, up to September, I think October, somewhere there, the numbers had drastically reduced. Part of this is because of the measures that we had put in place. Now, that is where the media equally helped us to play a role. So, what we did partly was to train them in election reporting. Others did their in house trainings, and they could only call us to go in and provide expert advice and information on the electoral process. For others, like community radio stations who do not really have enough resources to do the training on their own, we had a program from the Commission and supported by the United Nations Development Program to roll out media training across the country. And we brought together different media houses in the 10 provinces of Zambia to speak to them and take them through the election reporting. That was a plus on our part because we had equipped them with the right information to be able to handle the electoral process. So even when a political party representative comes and speaks about an issue, they
Yeah.
would go back to what it is that Electoral Commission of Zambia said. If they're not sure, they'll pick up the phone and they'll call you and say, this is
Yeah.
what has been said. What is the Commission's position on the matter? This is why from the word go, I did indicate that media was and is still our ally in delivering a credible election. And for us to be able to handle the rest of the processes, the media plays a critical role. Now, come to election period itself. You've mentioned about the 14th. Like I said, for us, in order to enhance transparency, we told the political parties to ensure they had representatives in all the polling stations
Yeah.
and they have access to the results. Because then that is what we were using even at the National Results Center, to
Yeah.
be able to declare. I can't really say on the part of the former president, but I can speak authoritatively from the Electoral Commission of Zambia point of view that we followed the procedure. And that in itself is what led to the acceptance of results of the 2021 general election procedure, in that we engaged and involved the stakeholders who are not just political parties, but you had the media covering the election in every polling station and bringing the people of Zambia to speed with everything that was happening. And you know that in this period, normal programming is disrupted. Everybody
Sure.
is focused on elections. And so the
Yeah.
story is about elections. And we have over 150 media houses combined in this country. That's radio, television, newspapers, and you also have, online media. And we made sure that we accredited media, including international media such as the BBC, Bloomberg. We had the Voice of America. They were there with us to cover the election and bring the globe, in fact, to speed on what was happening in Zambia. And so that in itself helped us, to diffuse the tension and ensure that every stakeholder accepted the election result.
That is really smart and very interesting in your description of the relationship with the media, how it was a mutual win-win relationship, that you were helping educate, inform, be a helpline, and in return, they were also doing accurate, fair, diligent reporting. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I was also struck that in 2022, the US Department of State invited you to come and attend an international visitors leadership program on election management. I was curious, of course, the United States has gone through their own very difficult election period. What, from the outside in, Patricia, what is your perspective on US elections today, the dynamics of those elections, and the role that media plays?
And I will tell you that there is no perfect electoral system globally.
Yeah,
Each electoral system is unique. It's got its own shortcomings, it's got its own challenges, and it's got its own positives. And that is what we learned when we came through to the United States for us to be able to do this. And this was at the invitation of the US government itself to say, look, you've delivered an election here in Zambia. We have nominated you. And actually, I went with 5 other colleagues, plus myself, 6 of us, and they specifically curated this program for us to be able, to see how they handle their elections. And for us, that was an amazing thing to do, because there are things that you can learn. There are things you can come back and adapt and adopt in your electoral system. And there are also things that cannot apply. For instance, we learned, and this, we laugh with my colleagues when we think about it, that every state in the United States has its own and unique electoral laws. In
yeah,
Zambia, that's a different story. The
yeah,
electoral laws apply across the country. So you won't find, different laws in a given province. And you also just find that everything is in one line. The
yeah,
Constitution, the Electoral
yeah,
Process Act, the Electoral Commission of Zambia Act guide how we handle elections. But it was also good to see how the fact that the US still uses its postal services to handle an election, we look back at that and we say, well, that system cannot work back home because there will be suspicion. How do you even talk about early voting in a country like Zambia? Otherwise, stakeholders would just, be suspicious to say, what is the Electoral Commission trying to do? And
yeah,
more so for you to be able to send ballot papers through the postal services. It's unheard of. But we
sure.
saw how that system, how effective it is, in the United States compared to what we have here in Zambia, but also the use of technology. at the beginning of this year, we gave our strategic direction, our strategic intent that one of the areas that we would like to explore is electronic voting. And when we had an opportunity to go to the US, we were in Virginia, we went to St. Louis, we went to Denver, and we looked at how they're using technology in terms of e-voting. We also went to a company that manufactures some of the pads that they use in the electronic voting. It's amazing. And that is why I said, technology keeps advancing. You need to be agile for you to be able to adapt to the growing systems, globally. And we learned actually that for us here, we need a lot of stakeholder engagement, stakeholder buying into that if we need to go that direction. I think our friends have had systems where, they've used electronic voting. At some point, they dumped it, they went back to it again, and so on and so forth. And they also shared their lessons, with us on what transpired. But coming to the story of the media, one of the things that I really wanted to have a look at is how misinformation and disinformation has affected the American electoral process. And we sat at the State Department when they received us. And one of the people that I was given to speak to is an expert in media issues. And he said, Patricia, if you're expecting a miracle on disinformation and misinformation from the United States, you will not have that miracle because this is rampant even here. We went to St. Louis and we met with this civil society organization that actually spoke to us and said, look, regrettably, they had a situation where a law was enacted based on disinformation. And this is when they were now trying to, normalize things and push that law back and so on and so forth. And we learned really that this issue of social media and misinformation and disinformation is a global challenge. And we need to just continuously see how we can keep on improving, especially now that we also have fact-checking platforms. We have one in Zambia. This has been supported by the UN program, and we have collaborated with them to ensure that we do our fact-checking. But speaking overall, media equally plays an important role even in the US elections. And for them, obviously, it's from a point of view that they have to give results. And these results mainly in a bipartisan way. For us, we have, like I said, over 70 political parties. Last year, we had 16 political parties participating in the general election at presidential level. Our colleagues that side were handling an election, for 2 political parties. We also saw in St. Louis how the 2 political parties work together for them to be able to deliver the electoral services closer to the people. So basically, I think it's important for us to note that media plays a critical role. And if you may allow me, about 3 weeks ago, we were in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, under the International Conference on the Great Lakes region and the United Nations to speak about inclusivity and integrity of the electoral process and how media can enable those processes. But we also found out that there are certain biases in the way media covers the electoral process. Political parties are more pronounced than women, the youth, and persons living with disabilities. And that is an area of focus for us. If we need to begin to amplify women's participation, youth participation, the persons with disabilities, what is it that we need to do? And those are conversations that we want to begin to have with the media going into next year on how we can, bring the inclusion into the electoral process.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Patricia. Shifting to a person who famously, was televised casting his very first vote in the first free democratic elections of South Africa, Nelson Mandela. Can you take us back to a moment in time when Mandela inspired you in some way? What was it? Where were you? What was that moment?
Right. Nelson Mandela still remains a global icon, and Zambia's relationship with South Africa makes us inseparable. We know each other's history, like literally at the, back of our palms, and literally like that. For me, I started learning about Nelson Mandela when I was in primary school. So civics, history, and we used to call that social studies, brought us to speed on what was happening in South Africa in relation to apartheid and how Nelson Mandela was involved in trying to create a South Africa that was conducive for everybody. Now, these are things that we just read through stories, through
Yeah,
history books. And
yeah,
I personally didn't have an opportunity to meet President Nelson Mandela, but I watched a movie called The Long Walk to Freedom that
yes,
somehow speaks huge about this African or global icon, Nelson Mandela. And for me, and the story therein is the resilience, resilience unmatched. And that is why when we opened our discussion, I spoke to, boldness in terms of resilience. It was just amazing to look at that story through the movie Long Walk to Freedom, where this man is never giving up. Even when he's in prison, he's still not giving up. He comes out of prison, he's still not giving up, and things just happened. What else are we asking for if we need to look at a resilient person? What else are we asking for if we have to look at the lessons? Where do we draw the lessons of resilience? 27 years in prison, and somebody still comes and they continue still, hoping that one day this country is going to be free and it is going to go and have its independent elections. Those elections happened and he became president. A few years in that, he says, I'm stepping down. That's amazing. For me, that is where the story of resilience really starts and ends, at least for now. I'm yet to come across any other person that will inspire me in such a way.
yeah. And is there a particular part of the movie that you recollect a moment when that really touched you?
Absolutely. So there is a part where he leaves home and he's joining the other freedom fighters. And apparently, there are people that are looking for him. And because they want to take him to prison, and he's so calm. He comes back home and they take him. He's so calm about it, and he keeps assuring his wife and his children that it's going to be okay. When you know for sure that what is happening is not going to be okay. For me, that in itself was just something else. It
How
was
did
really
you
something
feel?
else. Very emotional. And because, like I've said, Zambia and South Africa share a rich history.
Yeah,
Having read about something like that in books and then having that story being told in a movie brings some sort of reality to you. It was
yeah,
quite an emotional moment. And I said to myself, what level of sacrifice is this? That you leave your wife, you leave your children, and you're looking at the bigger picture and you say, this is not about me, but it's for the entire South Africa. Who else sacrifices like that? And
yeah,
I reached a new level of respect for Nelson Mandela in that moment.
yeah, yeah. Do you think his leadership example is still relevant for the world today? And if so, why?
It's very, very relevant. And for me, even then, I speak to the spirit of forgiveness. I
Yeah,
think we live in a world where wrong things are done in different ways. It could be at family level, it could be at national level, community level. but I think he showed us that we need to love one another. We need to put back what's in the past remains in the past. We need to forge ahead. We cannot forget, quite all right, but there's always a moment of moving forward. And that moment of moving forward is what brings growth. He's telling us don't be stagnant. Don't just look at where you are today. Don't just focus on the past, which didn't help you. Learn from the past mistakes, and move forward. Even as you move forward, learn that you can go somewhere literally out of just moving forward.
That's very significant. Where have you applied that in your own life, Patricia? I mean, it reminds you of your story of when your mother passed. Did that resonate with you? And did that reinforce the decision you made in grade 11 when your mother passed away?
It did. At that moment, I didn't actually realize when my mother died because I didn't have an opportunity to watch this movie. But when I watched the movie, I think I went back into my own life. And I've had people that had described me as a resilient person, but I
Yeah.
didn't know, and I wasn't really sure where that description was coming from. But when I looked at Nelson Mandela's life, I knew the true definition of resilience. And that's when I said, oh, it makes a lot of sense. And I
Mhm.
could have been anything, you know? Maybe today I wouldn't be sitting here and speaking to you if I wasn't resilient.
Yeah.
Life was tough. In this description, it sounds a bit easy because these are things that have passed, and you look back and you say, hmm, I never thought I would even come out of that, you know? And I'm thinking, I'm sure even Nelson Mandela, when he sat in prison, he never thought he was going to come out of that prison. Prison for me was that life of suffering, that life where I had to move at some point without shoes, when other kids have shoes. Prison for me was carrying one tablet of soap in a boarding school and you're a girl, and other children have so many, tablets of soap. Prison for me was to work as a maid when I had the right qualifications at that point to sit in a university. Prison for me was literally everything around losing a mother. When you don't even have a father, your life just drastically changes, and you have to begin to think how things are going to happen, how your life will change. It even makes it worse when you realize you are on your own. You are all you have. And if you make a mistake, if you miss this person, if you lose this person, if you lose this opportunity, you're done, you're gone. What do you need to do? You have to remain focused. And you have to weather the storm, regardless of what was happening. I mean, I look at what was happening at Robben Island in that movie, the
Yeah.
hard work that they were made to do, and those stones and things like that. And I'm thinking it's not typically that kind of prison for me, but it relates to the very things that I went through, the sweat that came in doing all these manual works for me to be able to raise school fees to go to school. So I'm able to pick a whole lot of lessons from that movie, from the life of Nelson Mandela, and I'm applying it to myself. And it just doesn't end with me, and because I do a lot of mentorship for
Yeah.
young ladies, and these are young ladies who are more or less like in my shoes. They look at me because I've told my story, and it's easy for them to relate with the story. And they're asking you how to navigate the environment where they are, and you share your own experiences, and it gives them encouragement. They look at you today and they say, if she is where she is today and she was in our shoes and probably worse than where we are, then there is true hope for the future.
So, in our final moments, Patricia, what are your final words about leading boldly into the future in terms of what you would say to our generation and the next? And what do you think Nelson Mandela would say to our generation and the next?
And I think for me, I'm a firm believer of process. And the way I describe process is that we should never allow ourselves to jump the process. If the process to greatness or leadership demands that we go through prison, and I'm using the word loosely in terms of prison because of the description that I have given a few
Sure.
minutes ago, then
Yeah.
let's allow to go through that prison. That is where character is shaped. That is where we are made. And so if you jump the process, if you're in a hurry to get things done, you may find that you might not even reach the level that you want to go through. So we also need to be quite deliberate about what it is that we want. And in speaking about this, I talk about networking. For me, networking, Anne, is being strategic.
Yeah.
Strategic in the sense that I know what I'm looking for in my networks. I cannot afford to be everywhere. I cannot afford to be all over, but I'm identifying the right people. Who are
Sure.
these people that can help me to move? And from networks, that's where I say mentorship is very important.
Yeah.
Mentorship is what has made me to be where I am today. I worked with this amazing woman who's the CEO for one of the banks here in Zambia called the Zambia National Commercial Bank. Her name is Mukwandi. Mukwandi believes in mentorship. She is that kind of leader who will move from her seat and make you feel for some point that you are the CEO of the institution. She
Yeah.
deliberately exposed me where she needed to be. She would tell them, Patricia will come and represent me. And she says, what I'm doing is I am mentoring you, I'm growing you to become this person that should come and overtake me. And in overtaking me, I want when I sit back one day, I look back, I should be able to say, I played a role in that girl's life. And so for me, that is where I want to end. Remember, do not jump the process. And also remember, networking is very important, but be strategic in your networks. And whatever you do, please find a mentor. Get a mentor who's going to help you walk through your journey, whether it's career, whether it's business, whatever it is you do. I am where I am today because this is the journey that I have walked.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you so much. What a gift to talk to you. And I look forward to picking up the conversation and sharing many more special moments with you. Thank you so much.
Grateful for the opportunity to speak to you, and
Talking to the bold Patricia Luhanga about her leadership and her Electoral Commission team actions to protect Zambia's democracy and facilitate the peaceful transfer of power in the 2021 hotly contested elections, evokes many thoughts around the meaning of democracy, its trends, and its fragility. So, what does the word democracy mean? It comes from two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power. Simply put, the power of the people, a system of governing which depends on the will of the people. Freedom House, a nonprofit research institute and think tank based in Washington, D.C., for the past 50 years annually measures and reports on freedom in the world, political freedom and civil liberties measured by country, giving us a global and a country freedom index. Its core conviction is that freedom flourishes in democracies when governments are accountable to its people. Its 2023 report records that the rise of autocrats and the democracy recession are real. Global freedom has consistently declined for its 17th consecutive year. And while the rise of authoritarians is a very dangerous and real threat, they are beatable. In the United States, where I live, we have seen that democracy, once a global gold standard, is under a brazen attack. It begs the question, who is killing democracy? Is it the politicians, the publicly elected officials, Or is it we, the people? Some recent Harvard research suggests that it is both. The politicians, many of them, no longer play according to the rules. They fail to deliver what the people want. And in this unprecedented income disparity and inequality, government is not delivering. On the other hand, we, the people, multi-millions of Americans, firstly, do not want democracy. They want to protect their white privilege. Many multi-millions do not trust the system. And even the majority of Americans who say that we want democracy fail to commit to daily action to fight the good fight to keep it. To keep our democracies, it requires that we, the people, wake up, stand up, and speak out. But speaking is not enough. It requires that we take action, to get onto those campaign trails, to go to the polls, and to take the daily actions to protect our system in our communities, in our counties, and in our states. It is we, the people, that will determine whether our democracies survive and thrive. So until next time, take care and take thoughtful, bold action.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leading Boldly into the Future. Please find links and connections mentioned in this show in our blog and never miss an episode by subscribing at anne-pratt.com. That's ANNE-PRATT.com. May these insights from inspiring industry leaders, remarkable disruptors, and courageous champions of change bring forth a brand new you, emboldened, empowered, and ready to inspire hope. Come back soon, share with your friends, sign up on anne-pratt.com and join our movement for change. Why? Because the world needs you to lead boldly too.